Is it okay if I tell you a story? This is a true story. Not like a Texas story. I mean, like this is a true story. So I live in South Dakota, and this last autumn I went to a funeral. It was a rural funeral, and I mean rural. I drove out to this little town that most South Dakotans haven't heard about. It was that kind of rural. And I drive up to this white clapboard church, and it is surrounded by a field. There's not another building in sight. It was that kind of rural. And I go inside, and I'm greeted by several men who are all wearing plaid, and they're all farmers, and they all tell me what I need to know, and not a word more, because it's that kind of rural. And I go and I sit in the pew, and the service starts for this man named Melvin. I didn't know him, but the pastor comes up and describes Melvin and says he was in his 90s, and the man had brought in over 70 harvests, and he was a farmer's farmer. And everyone nodded and agreed. And we sang a couple of hymns. And then the pastor invited up this man in his 30s. And he said, I'd like to introduce Melvin's grandson who's going to deliver the eulogy. And the grandson came up. And he got behind the podium. And he put his hands on the podium. And this is his eulogy. And I'm not exaggerating much at all. This is the eulogy. Well, Grandpa Melvin and I were working out in the field one day. It was a hot summer day, one of those South Dakota days where the wind dies down all of a sudden and you can hear the corn growing. And we're working out in the field, and Grandpa Melvin, he's working on the tractor. And all of a sudden he stops and he says, grandson, some men love drinking and some men love chasing women. But me, I love corn. And that was it. That was the eulogy. And everybody nodded and laughed because that's what you would say about Melvin. That's the truest thing you could say about Melvin. The man loved corn. He loved planting corn. He loved raising corn. He loved harvesting corn. He loved corn. Some men love drinking. Some men love chasing women. But me, I love corn. Now, what would you do with a testimony like that? Well, I can tell you what the minister did. The minister came up afterwards. And this is his sermon, and of course, this is much condensed. This is what he says. Folks, this world doesn't matter. This whole world is really just a practice run for eternity. That everything you do here doesn't really matter. What really matters is your soul. Don't be worried about material things or grabbing onto things in this life at all, because really what you need to be focused on is your immortal soul, which needs to be cleansed in this life, because this life is not really real. What's real is eternity. So this is really just a practice run for eternity. And everybody said, amen. And my response to this, theologically, is, and pastorally too. But what would you do with that testimony? How would you have framed it theologically? Because that's what systematic theology does for us. It helps us to frame our testimony in this world, and it helps to frame the testimonies of our people. Amen? Well, today we get to talk about that, about systematic theology. We get to hear from theologians who are going to help us talk about God better, and by talking about God better, talk about our work better.